Hello, my name is Eric Rayo, and in this video, we're going to be presenting the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, his life, his ministry, and the claim from many witnesses that they saw him resurrected from the dead, as well as giving arguments that are reasonable for the existence of God. And we're going to be doing so by providing sources like Josephus Flavius, who was a Jewish historian back in the time that the apostles lived, and Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, again, also back in the time where the apostles lived. We're also going to be providing sources like historians and scholars who live in today's time and work in universities that are current in today's time and who give attestation to these facts, whether they are Christian, non Christian, skeptical, atheist, or agnostics, or from other beliefs, as well as manuscripts and other sources where you can derive your data from. So the Christian claim, yes, we do claim that we have a belief in God, but we're also claiming that we are accompanied by the experience and we also have historical evidence. Therefore, we as Christians can have assurance. This claim is not the same claim as the common atheist or skeptical claim when they come up to you and tell you, well, just because I believe in Harry Potter does not make him real, or just because I believe that Snow White is real, are you guys going to believe that she is real? Well, it is not the same thing because we as Christians, yes, we do have the claim and the belief, but we're also accompanied by experience, and it is just not personal. It is not just us or interested parties who want to come up with a certain agenda, but it is people who are living in today's time, people who lived all throughout history, and even the people who claim to have seen Jesus, they themselves were able to die for this experience and that belief. So it makes this argument very different. And we also have the historical evidence that historians and scholars, whether Christian or non Christian, agree on. Therefore, these two arguments are very different, and we Christians can have assurance due to this large body of evidence. Moving on, we have to deal with presuppositions and unfamiliarity with evidence. And forgive my English because I might mispronounce some words because I'm not fully fluent. But to keep going, many things are bigger than science. So science cannot be used to measure everything. Science cannot explain a lot of things because we are limited by our technology and our human comprehension. And since God is way above science and way above our comprehension, we cannot use science to measure him. And I'll give you also a current example that we will see that science cannot prove. Our memories. Our memories, even though we can provide brain scans and measure what our brain is telling us that we believe 100%, it does not mean that our brain made up or did not make up that memory. Our memory may be different from what actually truly happened on a certain point in time. So again, science can't prove everything. So science will never be able to prove something that is supernatural. Literally, that is because the Oxford definition of science is knowledge about the structure and behavior of the natural and physical world based on facts that you can prove, for example, by experiments. A resurrection is supernatural. So it is caused by a non physical reason, which we say to be God. Therefore, it cannot be proven by science because it's above and beyond the scope of science. So, other examples that cannot be proven or measured by science are history, like I said, our memory, this whole reality that we're experiencing right now, and ghosts, things that go way above our human comprehension. And so, there's many things that science cannot prove. So, we have to be reasonable in what type of evidence we're looking for. So some usually have trouble accepting anything to do with God due to bias or any personal reasons. Yet they are more lenient to accept the theories by physicists or historians, which neither have a proven or be able, they're not able to be proven. So yes, they might have a lot of evidence, but again, To prove the Big Bang Theory, we would have to go back in time and see it actually happen. Not just one person experiencing it, but every single person, so we can actually all know that it is actually true. And of course, that is impossible. So now, parallel universes, the string theory, the theory of evolution, all these things. Yes, we have a lot of evidence, just like us Christians have evidence for the existence of God. But again, no physical evidence will be able to prove something that is way above the scope of science. So, these theories and claims are explanations based on evidence for questions. Similarly, the resurrection of Jesus cannot be proven by science because it is now, instead of science, the best explanation based on evidence. We cannot go to a laboratory and mix some chemicals up and prove that George Washington or Jesus Christ or any ancient historical figure actually existed. So we have to be reasonable and gain historical evidence instead of scientific evidence. So if science can't prove it, then what is the best explanation? People often say you can't explain things with God because you can't prove his existence. They themselves presupposing that he doesn't exist. So we're always all of us doing the same thing. Some of us presuppose that he does exist when we argue for his existence, and some presuppose that he does not exist when they argue for his non existence. So, again, we have to be reasonable and stick to either supernatural claims or physical claims. So there's common arguments. For example, the Bible's talking donkey. They say that the Bible cannot be real because it has a talking donkey, therefore it must be fiction. They atheists and scholars, even historians, which are skeptic, claim that Jesus' body was stolen. And we also have the very well-known theory of the Big Bang. Now, why do these fail as explanations to why the Bible or God is not real? Well, they fail because if God does exist, then he can make a talking donkey. Then also, the body of Jesus was never historically found. It would have been the best way to disprove Christianity if the Romans, who were the authority of that time, or the Jewish and the Sanhedrin, the leaders back in that time, um, proved by showing Jesus's body. If they had done that, then the claim of Christianity would have disappeared because Christianity is based on the fact that Jesus actually resurrected from the dead. So the Big Bang Theory, can we actually prove something that we can't see? If they claim that the Big Bang Theory is real, well, they're claiming something that they themselves can't see, which is the same thing as doing it for God, claiming that he is real even though that we can't see him. So again, we have evidence, but that doesn't mean that evidence proves something to be true. Now, atheist skeptics usually use something that is known as the loaded language fallacy. This fallacy is when they use a specific term, like zombies came out of the graveyards in the Bible. Well, the term zombies in our culture signifies a very specific fictional theme or term. And so, therefore, the zombie term sways away the audience by an emotional tactic to confuse the audience and make them believe something exaggerated happened in the Bible that wouldn't make sense. Again, the loaded language fallacy is also used in politics when people are just trying to get advantage over the other. But we must be reasonable, coherent, and to not sway the audience away from the actual evidence and the facts. Moving on, so that claim that the Jesus's body was stolen, let's talk a little bit about that because back in that time, the practice for Romans was to leave the crucified victims on the cross until they decomposed or were eaten by birds of prey. The crucifixion punishment was not just to kill a person, but to humiliate and expose them to everyone that walked by. So Romans were professionals at executing people. They knew what they were doing, and also the Roman soldiers, if they would not do their proper job in some cases, it's something that would be important, like crucifying or executing someone, they themselves would be executed. So Roman soldiers had to assure that their executions and their job was done and like completed, that it was actually performed, uh, that they succeeded. So, agnostic historian Bart Ehrman says, in sum, it was a common Roman practice to allow the bodies of crucified persons to decompose and be attacked by scavengers on the cross. As part of the disincentive for crime, I have not run across any contrary indications in any ancient source. And here below, he gives those sources that he read, and you will see that in fact all these claim that the bodies that were crucified were there, were left there to be eaten or to until they were decomposed. But with Jesus, we see that that was not the case, and that these scholars, whether they're skeptics or whether they're Christians, agnostics from any belief, historians, any reputable historian will give attestation to the fact that Jesus was taken off from the cross. So we will see that in future slides. Now, moving on, how do we assess what is true, reliable, and accurate? So, for the purpose of this study, we don't look at the Bible or Scripture or New Testament as something that we must believe or force the skeptics to believe before we can talk about them. We look at these as historical accounts, what they are to atheists or non-Christians. Historical accounts of testimonials written by those claiming to be eyewitnesses. Again, we have to separate and not mix the supernatural and the natural arguments. So it is history. We're talking about historical evidence. We're not talking about scientific experiments. We need to approach this based on tests, methods that historians use to seek explanations. For example, historians have always claimed that Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, pharaohs of Egypt, Genghis Khan, Confucius, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, George Washington, that many of these historical figures actually existed, and the skeptics or atheists who have a bias towards Christianity usually do not disagree with these historical claims. But when they have a bias against Christianity, they do disagree even with the existence of Jesus, which is one of the best attested facts that we actually have in our history, the existence of Jesus. So again, we have to be logical in what type of evidence we're looking for. We therefore have two options for the skeptic. We throw away and discard the majority of history that can't be proven by science because, again, science cannot prove history. And throwing away all this history and everything in our lives that cannot be proven by science would be totally unreasonable. Or the option two, we then accept that history is considered reliable based on critical analysis, archaeology, cross referencing, looking for internal contradictions on these documents, or statements or facts that now we know that they are not real or that they are mythical or fictional language. So, for example, um, if you're writing a diary, how do you trust that what you wrote in that diary of a certain experience that you yourself had, like for example, playing in a park? How do you know that this experience that you lived through is real and that it's not just a made up memory? Well, if you don't have pictures or videos or medical records of that day, it would be very hard. But if there's significant things that happened in that day, like for example, if the police showed up and they actually wrote some statement that you were there, or you have many eyewitnesses and they all say the same thing, whether they are people that like you or whether they're people that don't like you, they are all saying that, yeah, that person was there. Then you start accumulating all this evidence, and therefore you have a great explanation to say that that experience did actually occur in your life. So thank God that the life of Jesus Christ and his historical acceptance and historicity, um, are very significant. And Jesus Christ did transform today's world by his miracles or teachings or whichever you want to believe. But thank God that there is a lot of evidence, because there was many people that were writing about Jesus and giving attestation for his life, as well as creating churches and a large movement. And this is a biblical archaeology website. In my website, I will post also these slides and this information. I have more sources. In order to not have infinite amount of slides, I created these slides to be condensed, but in my website, I will be posting more historians and scholars. And this is underlined because it is a link, it is clickable. So in my website, you will be able to click the links and access these sources. So moving on, our first argument. What are the New Testament and the Gospels? So the New Testament, or the Bible in its entirety, it is not just a book written by an individual or a group of friends attempting to come up with a very nice story. It is actually a collection of independent testimonial accounts that speak on events and experiences with human life and the experience with God. Matthew is independent from Mark, who is independent from Luke, who is independent from John, who is independent from James and Paul and Jude, and everyone is independent from each other. So again, these are people who are writing in different points in time in different places. It is not just one whole book written by one person. So today's consensus view among scholars is that the Gospels are a real-world, non-fiction ancient biographies, and that Jesus was in fact a miracle worker. What is debated are the supernatural events such as miracles. So, if Jesus was known to be a miracle worker, skeptics will usually bring up arguments like, well, it was hallucinations or it was only visions. But these arguments are not very good, because it is not known in history for there to be an event where there was a mass hallucination. Usually hallucinations happen in one person. So, these type of arguments are not very do not very clearly explain these type of events that the Bible claims. However, the existence of God perfectly explains why these things would have happened. Scholar Charles H. Talbert once argued that the Gospels are in the genre of ancient biographies. And attempting to refute him, Richard Borage, who was also another scholar, ended up actually changing his view and contributing to his work in his source, What Are the Gospels? A comparison of Greco Roman biography. So another scholar says there is now almost unanimous agreement among Jesus' questioners that the historical Jesus performed mighty works. Graham Twelfree. Any fair reading of the Gospels or other ancient sources, including Josephus, inexorably leads to the conclusion that Jesus was well known in his time as a healer and exorcist. The miracle stories are now treated seriously and are widely accepted by Jesus scholars as deriving from Jesus' ministry. Several specialized studies have appeared in recent years which conclude that Jesus did things that were viewed as miracles. Bruce Chilton and Craig Evans. And yeah, these are some sources and some historians that you can look up. Now, why do we talk about many people believing that these miracles were true and that Jesus performed these miracles? Well, because it's very different for one person to make one claim or him and his friends to make one claim. And that is very different from people from different beliefs and different places making this claim that Jesus was a miracle worker. And these people who made this claim even died, gave their own life, or were tortured for this belief and this claiming that this experience was real. So scholars agree the New Testament and historical events. So here are some events that the majority of Christian and non-Christian scholars agree on. So these things are going to be things that non-skeptic historians um, and skeptic historians agree on. Keep in mind that we're talking about historians, people who are in the universities right now, that teach, that are reasonable, that they actually do research. We're not just talking about people who just make a claim just because they want to. These are people who are knowledgeable and get paid to do research, and that is their job. So first, we have that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and with this first claim, then we know that Jesus was real, that he existed, and that John the Baptist was also a historical figure. Two, Jesus forming the 12 disciples. So we know that Jesus actually gathered people to follow him. Three, Jesus was known for his miracles, like we said before. Four, Jesus was teaching on the primacy of love. Five, Jesus' Beatitudes, which is the Sermon on the Mount, and when he was giving his blessings. Six, Jesus' parables in the Gospels. We know that Jesus taught in parables, and this is very important. I just want to stop right here for a little bit. That is because back in ancient time, they didn't have phones or videos or cameras, or people were not waiting for the laptop with a voice recorder to record everything that Jesus was saying. Therefore, back in ancient times, it was better to teach in parables instead of just giving this whole big sermon. That is because saying something like the first will be last and the last will be first was way more memorable than giving just logical facts, like a list of logical facts. So that is why Jesus was known to teach in parables. Number seven, Jesus proclaimed the kingdom of God. 8. Jesus conflicts with the Jewish religious leadership. 9. Jesus disrupted the temple. 10. Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. 11. Jesus' empty tomb. And 12. The body of Jesus was never found. Again, these are all claims that non Christian and Christian historians agree on. And there's a lot more. And when I say a lot more, there's a lot more of these claims that the Bible makes that historians agree on, whether they're Christian, skeptic, atheist, from all beliefs. Moving on, again, scholars agree Jesus existed. Scholars, historians, and archaeologists are reliable sources because they study the existence of Jesus meeting academic requirements. They know and they study and they're educated in knowing how to properly assess events. They are peer reviewed, which means that not just because one historian claims something, does that mean that what he published is going to be the best belief that everyone can believe in. They're peer reviewed means that there's other historians and other scholars who are reviewing what this historian published and thus coming up with an agreement and seeing if what that historian published is reliable and it makes sense. So they do have to make very good research and be careful in what they publish. They have to present factual information, which is to the best of their knowledge, since they have to keep their job in their universities. So, who are the leading scholars that we can consider reliable? So, when you start studying the resurrection of Jesus or his existence, reading through articles, you will usually come up with some names that come up over and over again. So several names that appear in many articles, whether peer reviewing other articles or mentioned by other scholars, are E.P. Sanders, for example, Giza Vermes, and N.T. Wright. And these may be considered among some of the leading scholars. Now, it is interesting to note that one of these is agnostic, the other one is true. Like, for example, Bart Ehrman, who we quoted earlier, he's an agnostic, but he still gives attestation to historical events like Jesus's crucifixion, for example, or his existence. So again, no reputable historian is going to disagree with the existence of Jesus or most of these claims that we're presenting here. So these are again some historians that you can take a look into researching. And for example, a random one like Maurice Casey from Nottingham University, this is what this scholar says. This view that Jesus didn't exist is demonstrably false. It is fueled by a regrettable form of atheist prejudice, which holds all the main primary sources. and Christian people in contempt. This is not merely worse than the American Jesus seminar. It is no better than Christian fundamentalism. Um, it simply has different prejudices. Most of its proponents are also extraordinarily incompetent. Moving on, the early creed of 30 to 35 AD. Many people say that, well, we can't trust the Gospels because they were written so far away from Jesus's actual life. Well, we actually have a creed that is dated to 30 to 35 AD. Keep in mind that Jesus died in the years 29 to 33 AD, so this creed is known to have been written basically right before Jesus was crucified and resurrected and was claimed to have raised into heaven. So Paul converted to Christianity around 32 to 33 AD. Keep in mind that there's even agnostic skeptics that give attestation to all this that I'm saying. Paul quotes an early creed, which scholars agree is dated back to 30 to 35 AD in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 5. This reads, For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received. So Paul is saying that what is coming up right here is of first importance and that he received this that he's about to state. Quote, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that is Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. So this was the creed that scholars say was given to Paul on his way to Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion, as he became acquainted and informed about the church with Peter and James. And you can read about this in Galatians 1:18 to 19. No, now, was this creed Paul's invention? Well, again, it was written before his conversion in 30 AD. Scholars widely agree that it comes from the Jerusalem church, and the content is stylized, non naturalistic. So, what this means is that this is not natural language from someone that is just writing a letter to someone else. This is actually stylized content in the form of a creed. That is why, for these three reasons, historians agree that this is an actual creed that dated back to this time, 30 to 35 AD. So we have scholars also who give attestation to this, and we'll quote. Well, Gerd Ludemann was an atheist also. We have the Oxford Companion to the Bible, but I want to quote Robert Funk because he's a non Christian scholar, but he was also the founder of the Jesus Seminar. The Jesus Seminar was a group of scholars who got together to discuss historical facts about Jesus or events about Jesus. So, Robert Funk, again, a non Christian scholar, says, the conviction that Jesus had risen from the dead had already taken root by the time Paul was converted back about 33 CE, on the assumption that Jesus died about 30 CE. The time for the development was thus 2 or 3 years at most. And he says this, you can look it up in this source. So, moving on, who was present during Jesus' crucifixion? And this might seem like I'm diverting from what I was presenting, but I want to talk about this because there's a specific argument that skeptics use in order to try to disprove all this evidence, and it is called the exact word fallacy. But I will explain it here. So. Present in the Jesus's crucifixion was John, the beloved disciple, who also wrote the Gospel of John, chief priests, scribes, and elders, Roman soldiers, Mary Magdalene. Now, these are very important because, for example, chief priests, scribes, and elders, and Roman soldiers are in opposition to Christianity. They're all actually the ones that were taking Jesus to be crucified. So, if the Bible was made up, uh, the apostles or the writers, the disciples, would be basically shooting themselves in the foot by making the claims that these leaders were actually present during Jesus' crucifixion. And this is why historians widely agree that the crucifixion actually happened, because by naming these people, it would be very easy for these writers and these gospels to have been disproved back in that time, because they actually named people like Joseph of Arimathea, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, who again was a Jewish, opposed to Jewish were in opposition to Christianity. And well, Joseph of Arimathea, we read that he had more of a relationship with Jesus, but um, we'll see that later. Now, also naming people like Pontius Pilate, who was also a historical figure, or naming Caesar when Paul went to talk to Caesar. These are very big claims that could have easily been disproven back in that time. We also have Mary, the mother of Jesus, who was present, Mary of Clopas, Simon of Cyrene, and a large crowd. Again, since it was a Passover, many Jews would travel to the temple that was in Jerusalem where Jesus was crucified. So again, the crucifixions were not just to kill a person, but they were to expose those criminals to a large amount of people, to humiliate them. Now, why did James not write about the crucifixion? James is not mentioned to be present during the crucifixion, but also the book of James is directed to the church. It is a book of teaching. Usually, when you read epistles or the letters that Paul writes or that James writes or Peter, you will see that they state their name, but also you will notice that around the first verse, they will state what the purpose of the letter is. And so this argument, when people want to see James specifically mentioning that Jesus was crucified, that is called the exact word fallacy, because they're looking for something super specific that they want, and they want to find it wherever they want. And if they don't find that specific thing that they want wherever they want, it means that everything that we're talking about is false. That is the exact word fallacy. So James 1:1, for example, it tells us what the book was written for, or what this epistle was written for. So James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings. So again, James tells us what the purpose and who the audience is for. And since James is writing to people who were Jewish Christians back in that time, it, there's no real need to mention the crucifixion, since these people already believe in Jesus, already believe in his divinity and the claim that he resurrected from the dead. So it is more of this epistle of James is more of a letter to teach, not to speak to unbelievers. And you can read more of this right here. So we have more attestation for Jesus than we have for other ancient writers. And this is a very well known fact. There is more and better evidence for the existence of Jesus. This is based on how many people referred to him or wrote about him than those who wrote about Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, or many other ancient figures like Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. And again, these that are highlighted are links in my website. These are going to be posted, and you will be able to click on these links to see a comparison between the manuscripts or the amount of um, written letters or written epistles or claims from eyewitnesses that wrote about Jesus in comparison to the people or the amounts of evidence that we have for other ancient writers or other ancient historical figures. So Jesus was viewed as God. So the gospel writers wrote that the Jews attempted to stone Jesus for blasphemy, claiming to be God, which was also the claim which led to the crucifixion. So the Jews answered him, "It is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God." This is in John 10:33. So it logically follows that the followers of Jesus would accept his claims. If Jesus claimed to be God, then the followers of Jesus would, of course, logically, reasonably accept his claims. For example, I and the Father are one, which is John 10 30 to 38, and John 1 1 also speaks about Jesus being God. Scholar Crispin Fletcher Lewis says there is now, however, a newly emerging consensus that a high Christology means Jesus being viewed as God, goes back to the earliest period of the church, and that it was adopted by the Jerusalem based disciples in the early years, or even the first few months of the movement after Jesus' death. And here you can see manuscripts like P52, which is one of the, if not the earlier manuscript that we have about the Bible, from the New Testament, which is also about the Gospel of John, which was written around 90 AD. So P52 was written about 125 AD. So we do have documentation of when some of these manuscripts that we have found were written, and we also know in what type of material they were written in. You can, well, here when you click on this link, you will be able to see more of this. But also, there is the claim that many people say that the Bible is, or the New Testament, a telephone game. Like they say that it can't be real or the Bible was changed because it is like a telephone game. One person telling a story to another person who tells a story to another person, and then that person tells it to another, and it just keeps going. But that assumes that there's only one single line of transmission, only one person referring to another person, when in fact, these things that the Bible claims or the New Testament claims or everything that was claimed during the time of Jesus and the apostles, it was not just one person telling another person. It was actually a large amount of people telling a large amount of people. So this telephone game argument doesn't really make sense because it is not a single line of transmission. The apostles, the disciples, Jesus, they were seen by a large amount of people and they were heard by large amounts of people. So if the Bible is made up, again, the worst thing to do, or that would be, was to pick characters that could easily be invalidated, such as women, members of the Sanhedrin, Pharisees, or Roman leaders. So, for example, setting women as the first eyewitnesses to the empty tomb of Jesus would not be a very good tactic for a made up testimony. That is because during the ancient times when these Jesus lived and the disciples lived, the woman's testimony was not seen as reliable, nor were they considered competent to attest or testify in court. A woman fell under the same degree of reliability as lunatics, interested parties, slaves, deaf, and blind. Again, these gospel writers would be basically shooting themselves in the foot by claiming that women were the first eyewitnesses. That we have to base our belief that that the empty tomb actually was a fact based on women saying it. Well, in that time, that would not be a very good tactic at all. Yeah. So, especially because Mary Magdalene, for example, one of the women that found the empty tomb, was claimed to have been possessed by demons. So, the gospel writers are giving very embarrassing facts that there is no way that these things would be false, or there's no reason why they would be saying these embarrassing things in order to convince the audience to believe them.